you're a good debater and you're not afraid of a fight. So why have your comments off? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I've turned them on for a lot of things.
On your shorts, you do.
Right. In some of my lives, I think they're on, but almost as soon as I turn them on, there's photos of my family's homes.
Okay.
What's the address?
Yeah.
And at what point? And I just want to clarify.
Yeah, please.
I don't have to take that abuse.
Agreed.
Like, I don't come to work and slap the dick out of their mouth.
Kind of why do you have a disdain for informants, in your opinion?
I don't disdain them. I downright fucking hate them. Okay. That's okay. But see, this is why I can say it. That just crazy. It's like medication. I have a disdain for them because no man should ever go to prison on the words of another man, number one. Number two, in 90% of the cases you look at, the informant has done more vile and disturbing crap than those that are being accused. Number three, I find it oxymoronic when a man, Joey Merlino, because everybody knows who he is, he goes in front of a judge, they can bring up everything he's ever been accused of, including murders and whatever else. Even though he's acquitted, it doesn't really matter because it's a character judgment. But yet, in that same case, you can't turn that around and say, well, let's judge the rat. Judges don't allow that. So for me, it's like you're walking in, you're already behind.
I'm going to tell you something. If you never bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving up that stuff. I can't. There's good friends of mine out there fucking say, well, he's divorced, you have to do it first. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money. Because also means that the boss is your boss.
Bad sign with a blue moon. welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Now, I told you this segment, it's going to be a long one. There is no way around that whatsoever. But hopefully you guys get something out of this. So this week we're going to discuss the DeCavalcante crime family, but not in the way you'd suspect. You know, often we do the full histories and stuff, but, you know, Dean wanted to know more about John Riggi, and I don't think you can do that without showing examples and differences, say, between John Riggi, Sam the Plumber, and other guys. New Jersey has always sort of been stuck in one central area surrounded by the Philadelphia mob and the other 5 families of New York City. New Jersey, in some ways, was a small powerhouse in the early days, but informants and RICO laws pretty much dismantled Riggi and what he was trying to do. Riggi's own son-in-law, Sean Richard, who also ratted out a ton of New York guys, including Stephen Crea, really put a huge dent in the DeCavalcante crime family. And a funny side note to all of that was that Sean Richard, who goes by Jimmy Moran on YouTube, he was living next door to John A. Light. And the whole time New York gangsters were looking to kill Sean Richard for what he did, there he was living right next door to John A. Light. Never in a million years would you think the FBI would put 2 informants like that living right next door to each other. Crazy. New Jersey, more so after 1955, was really treated like a bunch of farmers by New York. And Sam the Plumber DeCavalcante never totally liked or trusted Carlo Gambino. And a lot of that was how New York tried to corner New Jersey and keep their proverbial foot on their throats. New Jersey could have truly been massive, but the issue always was they were outnumbered. And, they didn't have a ton of allies. And they were more centrally focused on the bigger picture versus being fair to another smaller family. When New York looks at New Jersey is what I meant. And it doesn't mean that New Jersey was soft or inept, but rather the complete opposite of that. But the larger issue, as I said earlier, was just being surrounded by everybody else. Same sort of issue that we've talked about when it comes to the Philadelphia mob. Even when you compare Philly to New Jersey, I mean, New Jersey is more proficient in every single way as far as rackets and stuff like that. So this show, which I'm hoping I can get into one part, is going to be less about the total history of it all and more about John Riggi, because it's an example similar to the Lucchese crime family in the early days, where one boss is replaced and the one right behind him is even more proficient than the first, expands ever so slightly using those very skills that the former boss of that crime family had. And just as we said before, Tommy Lucchese expanded outward from Tommy Gagliano, making the family bigger, expanding turf and rackets, but keeping in line with the general format. But when Tony Ducks Carollo becomes boss, he overextends too far, too quick, and the roof caves in on his fucking head, especially when he couldn't stop flapping his gums. And that's the same sort of situation, except that Riggi didn't flap his gums. He suffered the fate of informants. So if you're looking for a full bio, that's not what we're going to be doing. It's a simple, let's look at New Jersey, let's look at John Riggi, the rackets, the life, the expansion, the comparisons to other crime families and bosses and more. And it's my hope after this that you have a better understanding for exactly why New Jersey didn't ever truly fulfill what it should have been or what it could have been. So the DeCavalcante crime family, in case you're living under a rock, is the dominant Italian-American mafia organization historically based in New Jersey, often referred to as the New Jersey Mafia or the Elizabeth family. It developed substantial power in northern New Jersey through gambling, labor, racketeering, loan sharking, and construction industry infiltration. Basically, everything Philadelphia has never been able to do, with the exception of gambling. And unlike the 5 families in New York City, the DeCavalcante crime family operated largely within one state, but it maintained close ties with New York organizations and at times operated as a semi-autonomous partner, meaning they could do what they wanted. And the family reached its peak influence during the mid-20th century under the boss Simone DeCavalcante, whose leadership helped transform the group into a formal La Cosa Nostra crime family. Italian organized crime activity in New Jersey began in the early 1900s with immigrant gangs operating in Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, Patterson, and Trenton. And those groups were often loosely connected to Sicilian mafia traditions. And the national mafia power structure changed after the Castellamare War, which reorganized and recognized American organized crime into formal families across the United States. And after that restructuring, New Jersey remained largely under the influence of New York families, but maintained its own local organization. And so what about the early leadership? Well, the Newark Elizabeth faction is really where we're going to start. And the early New Jersey Mafia was dominated by leaders as Filippo Amari, who ran criminal operations in the Newark area during the 20th century. And after his death, power gradually shifted towards the Elizabeth faction. And one of the most important early figures was Sam the Plumber DeCavalcante, whose leadership during the 50s and 60s formalized the family structure. So what's the boss timeline here? Because there's a lot to talk about, but what was the 1920s to present? Well, in the early period from 1920 to 1935, the boss was Filippo Amari. From 35 to 55 was Nicholas Delmore, and Delmore would expand gambling and labor rackets. Then we get into the DeCavalcante era, which was 55 to 64. The boss was Simone DeCavalcante. From 64 to 73, Simone DeCavalcante. And that was really the golden age of the New Jersey Mafia, from 64 to 73. But once you get past DeCavalcante's leadership, you go from 73 to 1980. And that was John Riggi, who was the boss of the crime family. Then from 80 to 86, John Riggi. So John Riggi was in power from 73 till the 90s. And Riggi would expand into construction rackets and strengthen ties with the Gambino crime family. Then we get to this time period with New Jersey where it gets to be very turbulent in the 1990s. And, you know, Riggi ends up going to prison. We're not going to get into all of that. But while he's in prison, he puts John D'Amato on the streets to run things, and he puts Vinny Ocean Palermo to run the streets. D'Amato ends up getting murdered by Palermo and other people in 1992. Then from the 90s to the 2000s, you have what we call the informant era. Vinny Palermo becomes a rat. Anthony Capo becomes a rat. Anthony Rotundo becomes an informant. And that cooperation really triggered major federal prosecutions. So if you look at 2000 to present, as far as modern leadership, bosses that were believed to have held power include Charlie Maggiore, Girolamo Palermo, and Stefano Vitabile. The organization today is smaller, but they're still in operation. But at its peak, the family followed standard mafia hierarchy: boss, underboss, consigliere, capo regimes, soldiers, associates, and etc. So what are some of the known crews? Well, you have the Elizabeth crew, and that was always the traditional headquarters of the New Jersey Mafia, and their activities were gambling, loan sharking, and labor rackets. Then you get to the Newark crew, and their operations were construction, trucking unions, and waste management. You get to the New Jersey Shore crew, gambling operations, nightclub protection, and drug trafficking. So you have, those are all of the big hubs of what they do. Nightclubs, drug trafficking, gambling, waste management, trucking, construction, labor unions, loan sharking and gambling and extortion, et cetera, et cetera. They also have Staten Island connections because they have close cooperation with members of the Gambino crime family and the Genovese crime family on Staten Island. Now, while smaller than New York families, the DeCavalcante family controlled and influenced criminal activity in Union County, which included Elizabeth and Linden, Essex County, which is Newark and Belleville, Middlesex County, which is New Brunswick and Edison, Hudson County, which is Jersey City, Hoboken, Monmouth County, which is Long Branch, and Asbury Park. And those areas formed the core New Jersey Mafia territory. Then we have to kind of look at the major wars and internal conflicts. The DeCavalcante crime family experienced fewer, larger wars than New York, but those conflicts would shape its history, right? So if we look at the post-Delmore leadership struggle after Nicholas Delmore's death, factions fought for influence, allowing Simone DeCavalcante to consolidate power. In 1992, the D'Amato murder takes place. As we know, acting boss John D'Amato gets killed by members of his own family after rumors surfaced about his sexuality. That event exposed the organization to law enforcement scrutiny, and it weakened the leadership. Late 1990s, you have the informant crisis. Several high-ranking members turned government witnesses, devastating the family, and the cooperators revealed murders, racketeering operations, and family leadership structure. So you might be saying to yourself, well, we know John Riggi, we know Sam the plumber, but who are some other powerful members we might not have ever heard of? Well, number one on that list, we're going to do the 25 most powerful DeCavalcante members in history. Simone DeCavalcante comes up at number 1, John Riggi number 2, Nick Delmore number 3, Girolamo Palermo number 4, Stefano Vitabile 5. What about captains and influential members? 6, Vinnie Palermo. 7, Anthony Capo. 8, Anthony Rotundo. 9, Charlie Maggiore. 10, John D'Amato. 11, Michael Takeda. 12, Martin Takeda. 13, Frank Maggiore. 14, Joe Scalfani. 15, Ralph Guarino. Soldiers and Associates. 16, Salvatore Aparo. Charles Stango. 17, 18, Vinny Ocean. 19, Joe Merlino, Associate Ties. 20, Robert where am I? Robert Buccellato. 21, Philip Abramo. 12, Charles Inarella. 23, Anthony Graziano. 24, William Coletti. 25, Louis Moscatello. Racketeering operations. Historically, the DeCavalcante family made money through gambling, numbers games, sports betting, card rooms, labor racketeering, influence over construction unions and trucking unions, loan sharking, high interest lending operations, construction industry control, extortion of contractors and unions, narcotics trafficking between the 1980s and 90s. That's where their big hub of drug dealing came from. And the cultural influence that the DeCavalcantes have is they were the real-life inspiration for the HBO television series The Sopranos. Several FBI investigations into the family reportedly influenced the show's storylines. The decline. The organization's decline was caused by several factors: RICO prosecutions, high-level informants, competition from New York crime families, and changing criminal markets. And by the early 2000s, the family was much smaller during its peak. So the conclusion here is that the DeCavalcante crime family represents one of the most significant organized crime organizations in New Jersey, rising from early immigrant criminal networks to the family becoming a powerful mafia group under Sam the plumber before suffering major setbacks due to federal investigations and internal betrayals. And despite that decline, the family remains historically important as the only traditional mafia family headquartered in New Jersey, and as a real-world example of the rise and fall of the American mafia. Now, what about their structure? Let's look at their structure. Well, they follow traditional hierarchy used by the mob: boss, absolute leader, final authority on murders, membership, and disputes; underboss, operational commander, runs day-to-day family; consigliere, counselor, disputes and mitigates and mediates issues; capo regimes, crew leaders controlling soldiers and associates; soldiers, fully inducted members, and associates are non-members working within the crime family. Now, let's look at the late 1980s. The boss would have been John Riggi. The underboss would have been Giacomo Amari. The consigliere was Stefano Vitabile. And the major crews were the Newark crew. Vinny Ocean was the captain of that crew, and their operations consisted of construction rackets, labor extortion, and loan sharking. The Elizabeth crew was headed by Charlie Maggiore, and their operations were gambling, political corruption, and labor unions. Look at the Takeda crew. The leader there was Marty Takeda, and the members would include Michael Takeda and Philip Abramo. Their operations were loan sharking, extortion, and drug trafficking. The Jersey Shore crew, their operations were gambling, nightclub protection, and drug trafficking. And like any other crime family, right? Even though New Jersey was not nearly as violent as New York crime families, they still carried out several significant murders. So let's talk about some of these murders. Well, number one, probably the biggest one, was the John D'Amato murder of 92. And it was ordered by a leadership faction that was loyal to John Riggi. And the reason was there were rumors about D'Amato being gay, and that was damaging to them. And the outcome was that he was murdered. The Fred Weiss murder of 1989 was ordered by John Riggi and Associates, and the reason was Weiss was believed to be cooperating with authorities, and the outcome was he was whacked outside of his home in West Orange, New Jersey. Then there were informant fallout murders, and several suspected informants or rivals were targeted during the 80s and 90s period, and those killings were tied to racketeering investigations and internal discipline. So if you look at New Jersey, the one problem they had was very similar to other crime families. If John Riggi felt that somebody was being subversive, somebody was holding back money, somebody was talking, or somebody was given information, he just had them killed. And that, is something that's different than Philadelphia completely. Not that I want to compare Philadelphia and New Jersey, but given the fact their proximity and their small numbers, it's just interesting to me that that New Jersey seems to have more carte blanche to do these kind of things than Philadelphia did. Then there was major law enforcement operations. And yes, we will be getting to John Riggi. So I don't want you guys to think that this is just an ongoing thing here. You got to look at the 99 RICO indictments. Federal prosecutors indicted more than 30 members for racketeering, including murder, extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and key witnesses would include Vinny Ocean Palermo, Anthony Capo, and Anthony Rotundo, and those informants exposed the inner workings of the crime family. So remember how we put out those territory maps. Pull them out. If you need them, they're over on our Facebook page. We posted 2 of them. They're also on our YouTube community page. I will go ahead and wait a couple of seconds for you guys to grab those DeCavalcante operations while I actually pull them up so I can actually look and see what I'm doing. Which one is it? Okay, so it's not the Mafia comparison one. It's the DeCavalcante crime family, New Jersey Mafia territory thing. And here we go. The family's core territory included much of northern and central New Jersey, and the core areas would be Union County, Elizabeth, Linden, and in Essex County, you had Newark, Belleville, and West Orange, Middlesex County, Edison, New Brunswick, and Hudson County, Jersey City and Hoboken, Monmouth County, Long Branch, and Asbury Park. And those territories formed really the New Jersey Mafia's power base. Now, what about the 1980s, right? Because during the 1980s, the DeCavalcante crime family operated in a region that we've talked about all the time being dominated by the 5 families. They're surrounded, right? So what are the sheer fucking numbers here? Because the numbers are the story, okay? If we look at the Gambino crime family in the 1980s, they had, these are minimum numbers, not exact, but minimum, 250 made men, 2,000 associates, and their power ranking comes in at number 1. Number 2 in the power ranking would be the Genovese crime family, 200 made men, 1,500 associates, and they come in second. Number 3 on this list would be the Lucchese crime family with 150 made men, 1,200 associates, coming in at number 3. The Colombos, 120 made men, 800 associates, coming in 4th. The Bonanos, 120 made men, 800 associates, coming in 5th. And coming in dead last, the DeCavalcante crime family, 60 made men, 400 associates, coming in dead last. Now, where does John Riggi in the grand scheme of things compare to his contemporaries, right? Well, if we look at the 1980s, 1985 specifically, okay, running the DeCavalcante crime family was John Riggi. At the time, Paul Castellano was running the Gambino crime family. So here's the scenario. This is what we like to call a war game simulation, okay? It's John Riggi versus Paul Castellano. And the scenario is conflict would erupt over control of New Jersey construction rackets, Port Newark unions, and gambling territory. That's our scenario. That's what the conflict would erupt over. This is just an example purpose only. So the advantage has to go to Gambino here. And the reason why is he has larger manpower, right? He has stronger political influence. And he also has powerful crews in Brooklyn and Staten Island. The advantage for DeCavalcante, however, because those are the only advantages that Gambino crime family would have. The advantages for John Riggi and the DeCavalcantes at the time would have been local control of New Jersey territory, smaller structure with less internal conflict, which is a big thing, and close knowledge of unions and contractors. And if they went to war or if they had a beef, the likely outcome would be this. In most scenarios, the Gambino family would dominate due to the numbers and the influence that they carry. However, the DeCavalcante crime family would likely become a junior partner or an ally rather than a rival. So they would be smart enough not to poke the fuck. They might poke the fucking bear, but they're not going to war with the bear. But historically, this is actually what happened. Believe it or not, the New Jersey family maintained autonomy but cooperated closely with New York. So in other words, we can't beat them. We might as well have fucking business interests. And a lot of that is what handicapped New Jersey historically, right? So who were the 25 most influential members, which I think we've already done this one. No, did we? Charlie Stango. Okay, we did that already, so we need to move forward. Okay. As we know, the DeCavalcantes were the inspiration for the HBO series The Sopranos. I saw James Proctor post that Tony Soprano was based after Vinny Ocean, was based after John Riggi, and that's not true. Tony Soprano was modeled after Vinny Ocean Palermo. I don't know why James put that, but he's wrong. I mean, everybody knows that. It's a simple search to find that answer, but he was wrong on that. However, when you look at The Sopranos, it's very interesting, the similarities between The Sopranos and the DeCavalcantes, because the leadership was almost very interesting. They really honed in well on the mob, specifically the northern New Jersey mob culture they got right. And some of the storylines in the show specifically followed what actually happened with the DeCavalcante. So during the peak of the 60s and the 1960s through the 1980s, the DeCavalcante crime family was one of the most powerful organized crime groups outside of New York City. They were more powerful than Philadelphia. However, like we said, the family would suffer a major decline because of RICO prosecutions, informants, leadership instability, and shrinking rackets. And that's the big thing, the shrinking rackets. New Jersey could have been something, but when you're stuck in that small of an area and you're forced to sort of go toe-to-toe with not just Philadelphia, but also regular street urchin drug dealers and et cetera, and then you have New York surrounding you, you're kind of stranglehold. You're sort of in a stranglehold a bit. But despite everything, nobody's ever going to replace the DeCavalcantes, right? So, John Riggi. Let's look at John Riggi. So, he was born in New York City in 1925, and between the 1940s and 50s, he moves into New Jersey criminal circles during the post-war expansion of organized crime, and he begins to develop connections with the DeCavalcante crime family. In 1965, he begins his rise through the labor unions. Riggi becomes a business agent for the Laborers Local 394 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and that union becomes the foundation of his power in organized crime. And the reason why that's so goddamn important is because when we look at the greatest gangsters historically, the guys who are so proficient, the guys who are so good at what they do, are union guys. Paul Castellano was a union guy. Trafficante was a union guy. Joe Adonis, a union guy. Joe Adonis is probably the Anthony Scotto, union guy. Guys that really get their start, nickel and diamond, everything, and then move into the unions. Those are the guys that run crime families, and those are the guys that should run crime families, right? Because unions are so integral to what organized crime has become. In the 1960s, John Riggi forms alliances with boss Simone DeCavalcante, and he begins using union authority to exert control over construction jobs in New Jersey. That is major league shit. Philadelphia has never done that. This is major league shit. So if you look at John Riggi, his early leadership role begins in the late 1960s when Sam DeCavalcante goes to prison. Riggi begins exercising leadership within the family. Then in 1980, he becomes boss, even though it was really technically in 1973. But formally on the record with New York, in 1980, he becomes the boss of the DeCavalcante crime family. And under John Riggi, the family's primary rackets include, remember, when we talked about Lucchese, I want you to pay attention to this because this is important. A lot of bosses, when they end up taking over, like to change a lot of things. The one thing that John Riggi does very well is he takes what DeCavalcante had and he just expands slowly. He gets involved in construction industry extortion, union corruption, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. And his true height of power really takes place between 1980 and 1988, because in those 8 years, what Riggi is able to do is he controls laborers local 394, district council 30, construction projects all across northern New Jersey, and through union control, he can grant or deny labor unions, shut down job sites, and extort contractors. And any contractor who refused to cooperate would get hurt. Bare minimum, okay? And beginning in 1986 is when the feds start to step in. Federal investigators begin monitoring mob meetings in Elizabeth, New Jersey. They begin to monitor restaurants and union halls. They begin to monitor construction companies that are tied, albeit loosely, through third parties to the DeCavalcante crime family. And wiretaps and surveillance eventually would lead to these indictments. The first major indictment comes in October 16th of 1989. Riggi and several associates are indicted on federal racketeering charges related to union corruption and extortion. In 1990, he's convicted of labor racketeering and extortion and sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, here is what's interesting. Okay, but before I go there, I want to read something. Go to your DeCavalcante crime family map. Obviously, we look boss John Riggi, underboss Giacomo Amari, consigliere Stefano Vitabile. Underneath that, Vinny Ocean's Newark crew included Anthony Rotundo, Joe Scalfani, Philip Abramo. Under the Elizabeth crew, Charlie Majuri ran that. Under that is Frank Majuri, Ralph Gorino, and Charlie Stango. Martin Taketa had his own crew. He has his brother Michael and Salvatore Aparo. The Jersey Shore crew included Vinny Ocean, Louis Moscatello, and Anthony Capo. Look at the 1920s to 30s. Newark and Elizabeth gangs. 64, DeCavalcante becomes boss. The family expands. In 69, major gambling indictments drop. 50 members are charged. The 80s to the 90s is largely considered the Riggi era, and his main hub was construction racketeering. 99, massive FBI busts, informants and RICO trials. 2015, arrests in decline, and modern crackdowns. So, when you look at Riggi, right after he goes to prison, he ends up in prison. He gets convicted in 1990, gets 15 years in prison. But through 1990 through the mid-90s, Riggi runs it from prison. And even while he was incarcerated, he influences the family big time. He appoints acting bosses as John D'Amato, who we know gets killed for allegedly being gay. In 91, you have internal violence. Former underboss Louis Larasso disappears, and it's widely believed that he's murdered. Pissed off a bunch of people. In 92, acting boss John D'Amato is murdered by members of the family. And those events reveal the internal stability that had already begun. You look at the late career of John Riggi in the 90s, several high-ranking members become government witnesses. Key informants were Sean Richard, Anthony Capo, Anthony Rotundo, and Vinny Ocean Palermo. And those witnesses exposed the structure of the family and connections to unions. Sean Richards was very, very dangerous for John Riggi. Also his son-in-law. Imagine that shit. John Riggi was his father-in-law. He is the guy that testified between the unions in New York and New Jersey. And that was awful for the DeCavalcantes. So if we look at the detailed breakdown of Riggi indictments and trials, you have to look at them. We have to begin at 1989 federal racketeering indictment. Court, federal grand jury, Newark. Charges included racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, labor, union, corruption, illegal payoffs from construction companies. That indictment included 33 counts of an alleged 10-year pattern of racketeering through union activity. So for 10 years plus, they went unfettered. The co-defendants are Jimmy Palermo, who was a captain, Salvatore Timpani, John J. Riggi, who is John Riggi's son, and Vinny Riggi, who is also John Riggi's son. And the core criminal scheme here was prosecutors argued that John Riggi used laborers local 394 to control construction projects, and those methods included extorting contractors, forcing companies to hire union workers, demanding cash payoffs, arranging no-show jobs for associates, and contractors also provided free home improvements and other benefits to John Riggi and his family. Then you had the 1990 trial. Riggi was tried in federal court along with his associates, and the outcome was he was convicted on 8 counts of extortion with labor law violations, acquitted on several other charges, including RICO leadership allegations. Even so, he still gets 15 years in the fucking can. However, Riggi would appeal that conviction, and an appellate court initially reversed the conviction due to procedural issues involving witnesses' cross-examinations. However, prosecutors continue pursuing organized crime cases against members of the family. So even if he gets it reversed, they're still coming at him. All right, so we're going to pull out your power map now. So we're going to, let me pull up my power map. Damn, this fucking annoying phones. I got like 8 phones on, guys. I apologize. Hold on. All right. Where is my power map? Power map. Okay. So what we're going to be looking at here is the New Jersey versus New York Mafia power map comparison from 1975 to 1995. All right. So you guys are going to pull this up, and it's going to have Simone DeCavalcante. It's going to say the DeCavalcante family hierarchy, 75 to 95. Simone DeCavalcante and John Riggi from the 60s to 73. Underboss Stefano Vitabile. And then it's got the captains. Then you go to the estimated membership in New Jersey versus New York. If you look, the estimated members here, 50 maid, 300 associates, construction, labor, union, racketeering, gambling, Newark, Elizabeth, and New Jersey, and those are their primary epicenters. In comparison to New York, 400 to 600 maid guys, 200 associate, 2,000 associates, labor unions, construction, national rackets, and their primary power center was Manhattan, Brooklyn, Bronx, and Staten Island. So pull that one up, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Let's see. Okay, Riggi's power structure centered on 3 major things. Okay, 3 major pillars. Number 1, labor unions. That was a big fucking thing. Labor unions. Number 2 was construction industry contacts. Number 3, mafia crews. So if you look at union control, Riggi controlled Laborers Union Local 394, Elizabeth headquarters dispatching union laborers to construction sites. He also had District Council number 30, and that was regional labor authority. And because contractors required union labor, Riggi would control construction projects completely across the state. So what about his construction industry influence? Okay. And these are areas where Riggi had strong influence. Union County, Elizabeth, Linden, Essex County, Newark, East Orange, Hudson County, Jersey City, Hoboken, Middlesex County, Edison, New Brunswick, Monmouth County, Long Branch, Asbury Park. And through that union, he could decide which contractors received labor, which subcontractors worked on projects, and whether job sites were either open or closed, depending on whatever. Now, if you look at this map over here on the right, the red, and as we can see, the red represents the DeCavalcantes. Blue represents the New York 5 families. What's interesting is you look at the Bronx, they have some minor holdings in the Bronx, Newark, Belleville, Elizabeth, and Linden, Edison and New Brunswick, Asbury Park, Long Branch. And then if you look at the lightning bolts mean high racketeering activity, and that's in Manhattan, which specifically, not Manhattan, I misspoke there. Long Branch and Asbury Park are really the 2 major hubs for their high racketeering activity. The green lightning bolt, which I don't really, let me look at the map really quick. The green lightning bolt, which we don't really see represented for New Jersey, was shared influence and alliances. However, what is interesting is look at the skulls, the major murder hotspot. You know, that these guys, they're clipping motherfuckers everywhere. Manhattan, Elizabeth and Linden, Staten Island, which, you know what's funny? I'm looking at this map and it says Staten Island. I don't know why it did that. That's fucking weird. Anyway, what about mafia crew structures under John Riggi? Well, the administration. John Riggi was running things. Girolamo Palermo was number 2, the underboss. Stefano Vitabile, consigliere. Major captains, Vinny Ocean Palermo, Anthony Rotundo, Giuseppe. Oh my God. I have a glove for Lee Cole. I'm going to spell it. I can say it, but Schifilitti. Giuseppe Schifilitti. Holy crap. Lee would have been like Scafilitti. Anyway, Philip Abramo and those captains ran loan sharking, gambling, extortion, and construction. So why did John Riggi fall? I mean, the guy was highly intelligent, highly smart, but there were several forces that sort of came to work that combined to fuck Riggi's power base up, right? Number one, federal RICO investigations were the number one problem, right? RICO laws allowed federal prosecutors to dismantle mafia hierarchies. Number two, the big elephant in the room, electronic surveillance. Wiretaps placed in restaurants and meeting places captured incriminating conversations. Number three, informants. Cooperating witnesses exposed internal operations within the crime family. And number four, the sort of the cancer for all crime families, internal power struggles. Murders and rivalries weakened leadership stability. So what's the historical significance? Well, John Riggi was one of the most powerful mafia leaders outside of New York City ever. And at his peak, the DeCavalcante had about or over 50 made guys. Hundreds of associates worked under the organization. And through union control and labor racketeering, John Riggi founded one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the history of New Jersey. Let's see. I think we read that. We've done that. Okay. Done that. Okay. So the reason why Staten Island is such a big hub is because Riggi had alliances with members of the Gambinos and the Genoveses in Staten Island. And that connection, what it truly did for the DeCavalcante crime family was it allowed them to have those connections to help protect them from, say, the other crime families. But one of the biggest reasons for the family's decline, if we had to really just pin it down, was the number of high-ranking members who became rats, like in every crime family. And here are some members who were loyal, who never cooperated. John Riggi never cooperated, always loyal to the bottom line. Stefano Vitabile, consigliere, he was always loyal. Martin Tacchetta, captain, loyal. Michael Tacchetta, soldier, loyal. Charlie Majuri, who is alleged to be the new boss of the Cavalcante crime family. He was a captain, he was loyal. Frank Majuri, brother to Charlie. He was a soldier, and he was loyal. However, who turned informant that was devastating? Well, Vinny Ocean Palermo. He was a captain, and he exposed leadership structures. Anthony Rotundo was a soldier, testified at multiple federal trials. Anthony Capo was a hitman for the DeCavalcantes, and he admitted to multiple murders at the behest of John Riggi and the crime family. Ralph Garino, who was an associate, confirmed very different and multiple extortion rackets, along with Sean Richards, who did the same exact thing. And their testimony allowed federal prosecutors to build major RICO cases. So what about the year-by-year power timeline? Well, from 1960 to 2020, it was the rise of the modern family. In 1960, the family grows under Simone DeCavalcante. By 1964, DeCavalcante officially becomes the boss. By 1969, federal indictments weaken the leadership. 1970, there becomes a power vacuum, and leadership struggles to follow DeCavalcante's imprisonment. Late 1970s, John Riggi rises to the labor union control, although I believe it's 1973 that he officially took over, but officially on the books is 1980 when he takes over the reins, but I believe it was in 1973. 1980 to 85, expansion into construction rackets. 86 to 88, federal surveillance intensifies. And the first major collapse comes in 89 when Riggi gets indicted on racketeering charges. Then in 1990, he's convicted and imprisoned for 15 years. 1991, internal violence begins. Underboss Louis Larasso disappears. 92, acting boss John D'Amato gets killed. 95 through 99, this is when all the rats come out of the woodwork. And then there's a succession of massive federal indictments which cripple the family. Early 2000s, 2001, major RICO trials involving dozens of members. 2003 to 06, several leaders sentenced to long prison terms. The modern period, 2010, family believed to be reduced to 20 to 30 guys. 2015, additional federal arrests of members involved in gambling and drugs. 2020, organization still exists, but it's a lot weaker during the Riggi era. And so what is the historical sort of assessment of the John Riggi era? Well, at its peak in the 1980s, their estimated membership was 50 to 70 made guys, 300 associates, And their primary rackets would have been construction industry corruption, labor union control, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and etc. However, the family collapsed due to RICO, multiple informants, internal instability, and federal surveillance. So what about the family tree from 1920 to 2025? The boss from 1920s to 1935 was Filippo Amari. Operations were centered in Newark and Elizabeth. Then they reached what we like to call the expansion era under Nicholas Delmore. From 35 to 64, he was the boss. Key developments there would have been gambling rackets expanded, alliances formed with New York crime families, growth of labor racketeering. Then you reach the Golden Age. And the Golden Age came under Simone DeCavalcante from 1964 to 1973. And some of those major achievements for that crime family would have been formalized the family as a mafia organization, expanded membership, strengthened ties with New York. And that era is considered the birth of the modern crime family in New Jersey. Then we reach a transitional period when DeCavalcante goes to prison. Frederick Simone takes over. John Riggi is the emerging leader of that group, and power struggles occurred following DeCavalcante's imprisonment. So what about, let's see, I think we did this. I'm not going to, okay. So who are, let's see, we've done that. Okay, I can pass that. Historical, okay, we did that. All right, so let's go to another war game simulation, the DeCavalcante crime family versus the Philadelphia Mafia. Interesting. They're in the same proximity. I thought it would be interesting to talk about that. The rival organization historically operating south of New Jersey is Philadelphia, right? So what's the leadership comparison, at least in 1985? Well, if we look at the boss in New Jersey, it's John Riggi. In Philadelphia, it's Nicky Scarfo. Estimating strength. DeCavalcante's had 50 made guys, 300 associates. Philadelphia, 60 made guys, 500 associates. I happen to believe the DeCavalcante's were a little bit bigger then. I think they're more closer to 70 and 500 associates, whereas Philadelphia would have probably been more like 40 made guys, 45 made guys. But let's look at the turf here. DeCavalcante's, Northern New Jersey, Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Edison. Philadelphia, South New Jersey, Atlantic City, Camden, and South Jersey shore towns. So what are some of the strategic advantages? Well, for the DeCavalcante's, they had strong labor union control, they had construction rackets, and they had alliances with New York. Philadelphia, on the other hand, nothing but a reputation for violence, centralized leadership under Nicky Scarfo, and basically control of Atlantic City casinos. That's it. And the likely outcome, if they went to war in a direct conflict, at least in the short term, was, in my opinion, I think Nicky Scarfo's organization would gain advantage due to just being aggressively violent. That's really the major thing. But if you look long term here, if they were to go at it long term, New Jersey would win. And the reason why New Jersey would win is because they would receive report from the 5 families in New York City, whereas Philadelphia would not. So the final historical perspective of all of that is that the DeCavalcante crime family remains the only significant organized crime organization outside of New Jersey. Outside of New York. From early Newark gangs of the 20s through the powerful reign of John Riggi into the modern era, the family has experienced expansion, federal crackdowns, informant betrayals, and gradual decline. So what are... And this is insane, right? What are the top 50 DeCavalcante crime family hits and attempted hits? And these are internal power murders, the first 5, okay? John D'Amato, murdered by 92. Louis Larasso, disappeared, murdered in 91. Joe Beck Ziccarelli, suspected internal hit. Joe Ruggiero, suspected discipline killing. Salvatore Aparo, associate shooting attempt. Then you look at the informant and the threat elimination murders. Number 6, Fred Weiss, killed in 89 in West Orange. Joe Sica, an associate murder tied to gambling issues and disputes. Anthony Cataldo, associated guy, he was killed. Robert Carbone, suspected informant and was murdered. Anthony Little Pussy Russo, associated killing. Then you have the gambling and loan sharking disputes. Salvi Testa, associate conflict killing. Now, we're gonna circle back to that because you guys might say, wait a minute, that was a Philadelphia thing. It was. but Salvi Testa owed some money to the New Jersey crime guys, which was also an ulterior motive for Nicky Scarfo to act. Okay. Number 12, Joe Ricciardi, dispute shooting. 13, Anthony Ferrante, bookmaking murder. Frank Cucciara, gambling dispute murder. Nicholas DeBona, loan sharking murder. Then you had drug trade violence. You ready for this? Salvatore Ruggiero, associate execution. Joe Russo, drug dispute. Vincent DeLuca, narcotics issues. Anthony Spano, drugs. Michael Coppola, associated killing. Then you had what we call street-level crew violence. Carlo Mangiovanni was murdered. Joe DiPiero, who was an associate, was shot and killed. Frank DeLuca, loan shark, was killed. Salvatore Messina, enforcement killing, meaning he broke the fucking laws. Robert, what is it? Hold on, I can't even read this. Robert Napolitano, he was an associate, he was killed. Crew rivalries. Anthony Barone, murdered linked to rackets. Joe Barone, revenge shooting. Joe Bonfiglio, crew dispute. Frank D'Angelo, loan shark dispute. Anthony Doria, suspected enforcement killing. Enforcement and contract murders. Vincent Lombardo, gambling enforcement. Salvatore Ricciardi, extortion dispute. Joe Romano, internal dispute. Anthony Russo, enforcement killing. Charles Vitale, rackets dispute. What about those attempted murders? This is just showing you how big and how powerful New Jersey was, okay? Attempted killing of a rival bookmaker, attempted murder of suspected informant, attempted assassination of a rival loan shark, attempted murder of gambling competitor, attempted murder tied to construction extortion, additional suspected murders. Joe Parisi, suspected in mob hit. Anthony Lanza, rackets murder. Carlo Moretti, enforcement hit. Salvatore Romano, mob killing. Joe Bellomo, associate murder. Frank Rizzo, dispute killing. Vincent Marino, mob murder. Joe Vitale, discipline hit. Anthony Colucci, gambling murder. Nicholas Marino, mob execution. 50. Those are just 50. Just 50. I bet you we couldn't do that with Philadelphia. Oh, well, Philly would probably have close to 50, I would have to admit. But anything more than that, no. So when we think about John Riggi and Simone DeCavalcante, what is the difference between the two of them? Well, what's the leadership styles, right? So Simone DeCavalcante, his leadership style was traditional mob boss, centralized control, strategic yet cautious. And DeCavalcante built the modern New Jersey Mafia structure during the 60s, and he focused on expanding membership, building alliances with New York crime families, and creating stable rackets. Well, what about John Riggi? What was his leadership style? Well, he was a labor racketeering specialist. He was a union-based power structure, and he had more of a decentralized crew, and Riggi relied heavily on labor union influence, especially construction unions. His administration generated enormous profits, but also attracted intense federal scrutiny. So when we look at Riggi compared to New York mob bosses, this is also interesting too, because we have to understand Riggi's place in mafia history. It helps to compare him to the leaders of the five families. So Riggi versus Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano, the similarities: heavy involvement in white-collar rackets, construction industry influence, emphasis on business operations. The differences? Well, Castellano controlled a far larger organization, and John Riggi relied more heavily on labor unions. What about Riggi versus Vinny Gigante? Well, Gigante was considered one of the most effective bosses in Cosa Nostra history. Gigante was extremely secretive, insulated leadership, and he had a very long reign. Riggi, more visible leadership, closer involvement in rackets, and more vulnerable to prosecution. So in other words, Gigante laid back, Riggi didn't. Riggi needed to be seen. Okay, what about Riggi versus Carmine Persco? Well, Carmine Persco ran both families. The similarities were Persco and Riggi ran their families from prison. The differences were that Persco led violent internal wars, highly confrontational leadership style, whereas Riggi had fewer internal wars and focused more on economic rackets. And the overall ranking of John Riggi among other bosses from the 1980s is 1 through 6 here. And this is just my opinion. You guys can, say what you want. But to me, the influence, number 1, Vinny Gigante, Genovese crime family in the 1980s. Number 2 would have been Paul Castellano, Gambino crime family. Number 3 would have been Carmine Persco, the Colombo crime family. Number 4, Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo, the Lucchese crime family, Philip Rastelli from the Bonanno crime family, and number 6, John Riggi. This would be pre-Castellano hit. Okay, so after that, it would have been different. But John Riggi, comes in 6th on this list. But to be perfectly honest with you, in my opinion, when I was writing this, I based it on turf, territory, membership, money, and et cetera. But really, I kind of want to revise this list live. Number 1, Vinny Gigante. Number 2, Paul Castellano. Number 3 to me would be Carmine Persco. Number 4 to me would be John Riggi. Number 5 would be Philip Rastelli. Number 5 would be Anthony Carollo. And number 6 would be Philip Rastelli. The whole point here is that Riggi was powerful regionally, but the New Jersey family was much smaller than New York organizational. So what's the historical assessment? Well, Simone DeCavalcante was the founder of the modern family in New Jersey. He was a strategic builder, and he had long-term influence. John Riggi, the most powerful New Jersey boss after Sam the Plumber, labor union powerhouse, but his empire was weakened by federal prosecutions. So once again, we're going back to the power comparison map, 75 to 95. Get those on out. And this map compares territorial operational leadership strength of the DeCavalcante crime family in New Jersey versus the 5 families in New York during the John Riggi era. So if we look at the legend of the map key, red equals the DeCavalcante core territories. Blue, New York City's 5 families core territories. Green, shared influences and alliances. The yellow lightning bolt, high racketeering activity zones. The skull, historical murder hotspots. So what does this map tell us? Well, what it tells us is this. And we're looking mainly at DeCavalcante's here. Northern New Jersey core areas. Newark, Essex County, which was the headquarters and the financial hub and the construction racket areas. Elizabeth, Union County, Union Power, Laborers, Local 394. Jersey City and Hoboken and Hudson County, waterfront influence and trucking rackets. Edison and New Brunswick, Middlesex County, construction extortion. Then you have the Northern Shore, Atlantic City influence, Long Branch, Asbury Park, which is all Monmouth counties. Shore gambling operations and nightclubs, Northern Ocean County, loan sharking, small gambling rings. Now, yesterday, I think it was one of our listeners that said, whoa, I thought that the Jersey Shore was totally Philadelphia. No, it wasn't. Not at all. So what are the strength indicators? Well, approximately 50 made guys in New Jersey, 300 associates, centralized under Riggi, union control, construction influence. And they had alliances with the Gambino family. Even if he didn't totally trust Carlo, he never looked a gift horse in the mouth, right? Now, if we look at the New York 5 family's territories on the power comparison map, you have Gambino and Castellano, which would be, you'd have the Gambinos under Castellano and Gotti, and their core boroughs were Manhattan and Brooklyn. And their influence was business rackets, construction, and union infiltration. You look at the Genovese crime family under Vinny Gigante, Manhattan and the Bronx, secretive control, strong infiltration of labor and political influence. You look at the Lucchese's under Tony Dux Carollo, Bronx and Brooklyn, construction, trucking, waterfront, low profile. The Bonanno crime family, and that would have been under several different bosses, including Rastelli, Brooklyn and Queens, gambling and loan shark and focus, Carmine Persco, Brooklyn and Queens, violent enforcement and internal wars. So what is New York City's strength indicators? 400 to 600 made members per family, 2,000 plus associates across New York City and New Jersey, national and international operations, greater capacity for violence, and federal scrutiny. So if you look at the map, red is DeCavalcante, and that's regional, and they're strong in northern New Jersey, but smaller footprint than any other New York City crime family. Look at green, alliances with the Gambino and the Genovese families. And what did that give them? Well, it gives the DeCavalcantes New York and New Jersey cross-border protection, and that comes at a price because they get a kickback. Why else do you think the Genoveses run the Newark ports? I mean, that should technically belong to the DeCavalcantes, right? So let's see. The lightning bolts, as we talked about earlier, northern New Jersey cities are union and financial hubs, whereas New York City has largest scale business and criminal diversification. And you look at the Skulls, which are murder hotspots in New Jersey, are more so linked to internal discipline and rackets enforcement, while New York City had both internal and intra-family wars. So let's see. I don't think I'm going to do the hierarchy thing because that's just going to start trouble. Let's see. So when Riggi went to prison, who took over things? Well, John D'Amato did till he gets clipped in 92. Vinny Palermo obviously takes over, becomes the rat. Charlie Majuri as well. Internal enforcement handled by soldiers like Anthony Rotundo and Anthony Capo. And crews here were largely autonomous, but Riggi controlled union power and large rackets centrally. And that's the big thing. And while I know that we haven't spoken specifically of he was born here, died here, did this, I just wanted to make one big reference point, is that the reason why John Riggi was so successful and why men like John Riggi are often so successful has a lot to do with how they come up through the ranks. But you would be hard-pressed to find somebody that's very proficient that did not recognize unions. Think about it. When Santo Trafficante Sr. sent his son Santo Jr. here to New York to work under the Colombos and the Luccheses, he worked under both, he was taught unions. And therefore, he was able to take it back, he learned, and sort of exploit that in Florida. Same thing here. Joe Adonis and Anthony Scotto and even Albert Anastasia or Tony Anastasia, these are guys that knew how to work the unions. And I personally find if we were to list off 100 different guys, 50 of those guys being union guys who came up through the unions or guys that controlled some sort of facet of the unions, if you look at their trajectory, they all became major figures in organized crime, hierarchical figures, whereas the 50 to the right on the other list who did not come up through the unions never reached that peak. And so when you look at New Jersey in comparison to Philadelphia, that's why I've always said it made sense for them to merge, because New Jersey has something Philadelphia doesn't, and that's unions and political control. Maybe not so much the political control these days, but they had it in the days, whereas Philadelphia, post Angelo Bruno's assassination, they didn't have it. Nicky Scarfo still had control of unions, but he botched that all up. And what I've often not understood about Philadelphia is why after Nicky Scarfo did somebody not come in and control these unions again? Natale was a dud. I don't think Merlino has any interest in working and I hate to say it like this, but I think Joey's a very one-dimensional thinker. Joey doesn't think long-term. Joey thinks for now. Money now, money now, money now. Whereas the difference might be now, you're seeing Philadelphia start to spread their wings in terms of unions again. That is huge. That is huge. And Philadelphia also has a lot of networking alliances, which they didn't have in the 60s. Yes, they had alliances with, certain families, friendships, but look at where Philadelphia is now. And that's the biggest thing I want you guys to sort of see. Take New Jersey. John Riggi took them and pushed them as far as they could go under his leadership, but informants and RICO laws and indictments and trials, that all decimated them. But look at what Philadelphia is doing now. I don't know why I just whispered that. But look at what they're doing now. The hierarchy's changed. They've changed the way they do things. They're inducting guys. They're spreading out into other things. They're very tight. They got a fucking crew in Westerly, Rhode Island. They got a crew in other places. They got crews in Florida. They got a very good working relationship with the patriarchic crime family. But perhaps more than that, they've been allowed to sort of work with the Gambinos and the Genoveses in Staten Island, specifically also as well the Luccheses with the Pernas. And that's big because what Philadelphia is doing is what New Jersey did 20 years ago. But Philadelphia, always the late comer to the party, is just figuring it out. Or maybe they now have somewhat stability to do it. But that's the thing, is New Jersey can only go but so far. Philadelphia is like a late bloomer as far as I'm concerned. And that's why I always said it made sense for those two to kind of merge together. Because if they merge together, now they're a powerhouse. The problem is egos and greed will never allow for that. And I happen to think, listen, you guys are probably saying, well, yeah, but is New Jersey still active? They are. What is their membership? I would say 35 made guys, if that. 35 would be pushing it. 30 would probably even be pushing it too. But the sheer amount of associates is insane. Every crime family has, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of associates. And I think that there's a wide gap between what an associate really is versus what your average John Q. public thinks. To be an associate, you have to be trusted, right? But to be an associate, you got to make money and you get put on the record with people. And whether or not you ever get made is not up to you anyway. But being associated just gives you the ability to work with everybody and make money. That's it. So when somebody says, oh, they're an associate, that's not a big deal, at least to me. I know 1,000 associates. You know what I mean? I've been considered one. So it really is more of, are you trusted? Are you able to hang around? Look at it as a guy that's prospecting. Prospects get treated like shit in the biker world, but when you're prospecting, you're there and you're there to prove yourself. Same thing with an associate. But the difference being is, I think with the biker culture, you really got to prove it. The mob, you don't. You can make money. I told somebody this the other day. I'm not joking. If I'd have kicked up 100 grand to Joey, I'd have been made yesterday. Because that's how Philly operates. They're money driven. Just like, mob culture. Money's the bottom line. It always will be. But the reality is that I think what ends up happening to a lot of crime families is there's a guy that shows an ability to make money early on, and they bring him in without totally vetting him or putting him through rigors of the streets. And that's why I always tell you guys, and I've told you guys before, they're always testing you. They're always finding ways to see what you're going to do. And that's how they base whether they want to be around you or not. But if you can't make money, you're worthless to them. That's why all of these fucking jerk-offs that are on YouTube, oh, I would associate. No, you weren't. You couldn't rub two dimes together. If Joey Merlino was left to his own devices to earn money, he'd starve to death. I'm serious. The guy's incapable of scheming. It's not scheming when you go rob a fucking train car. That's just stupid shit. That shows you how desperate they are. They're probably pulling copper out of fucking AC units out of windows in South Philadelphia for money these days. But like I said, I'm not saying they're specifically doing that now, but I think where Philadelphia is and where they're going, I told you, just watch close. The fact that they're uber violent helps them. It really does. And the same thing can be said for John Riggi and the DeCavalcante crime family. Brutal, violent. Make no mistake about it. But where does New Jersey go from here? I don't know. Unless there's a resurgence in New Jersey, I don't know. I've always often said that if I'd have been Sam the plumber, I keep the alliances with the Gambinos and the Genoveses, but I want what belongs to me. And I expand, and it just seems like New Jersey didn't really ever totally expand. Riggi did it the right way, right? Comes out slow. He takes what was before him by Sam the plumber, and he expands just slowly. Unions was a big thing. And that's why he was so integral and important to the DeCavalcante crime family. Brilliant guy, smart fucking guy. Difference is he was a hands-on boss. Whereas guys like Castellano, I'm the boss. I'm going to sit in my house and jerk off to the maid. That was the difference between the two men. Riggi needed to be seen. He needed to be heard. And I don't think that was an ego thing. That's a soft reminder. Don't fuck with me. That's the kind of boss you need. Because totally passive boss is no good. Castellano was not a passive boss. Joe Bonanno, probably one of the more passive of the bunch. Not nearly as passive as Joe Profaci. Joe Profaci was very passive, but each and every single one of these men were fucking serial killers. Let's just be honest about it. And so I think history is going to look back on John Riggi as the guy that was one of the greatest bosses in New Jersey history. The problem is short shelf life. He didn't have a short shelf life, but what I mean by that is just the organization. Because sometimes when you start getting into the unions, okay, let's start expanding. Like everything is like a crescendo. Everything's like a domino effect. And for Riggi, the biggest thorn in Riggi's fucking side was that piece of shit bastard Sean Richard rat fuck. That guy's a fucking bum. Ratted out his own father-in-law. Had no problem taking multi-million-dollar racketeering money, had no problem manipulating fucking the construction industry. Then when he got caught, what does he do? He rats like a bitch. And then he's living next to A-Light of all fucking people. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of today. I hope the John Riggi thing made a little sense. Like I said, I didn't want to go into like all of the specific cases. I didn't want to go into all of the specific details. I didn't want to do a born here, died here, because that shit's just fucking boring. But hopefully now you've learned some key differences between Sam DeCavalcante and John Riggi, and sort of where John Riggi stood with other crime families. And I'm going to tell you something a lot of people don't know. I think John Riggi was more mutually and overall more respected than Sam DeCavalcante ever was. And I say that because they never tried to encroach in Jersey. They never tried to tell John Riggi what to do. But they would tell Sam DeCavalcante what to do real quick. But they didn't do that with John Riggi. They never did that. And they're certainly not going to pull that shit with tin ears. Charlie Majuri. They're not going to fuck with him either. That's another motherfucker that's proficient. But, you know, we talk about ageism and stuff like that. And the majority of the New Jersey guys are all in their fucking old. You know, not to say that they're not proficient, but you need to inject youth. Everything evolves when you allow it to, right? But since the death of John Riggi, what's been in Jersey? What's been in Jersey? If John Riggi had wanted South Philadelphia, he would have taken it. There would have been, hell would have broken loose. But I think if New Jersey ever thought about pushing Philly out, they could have done it. They had the allies in New York. They had the power. They had the union base to do it. And all they simply have to do is needle somebody like Vito Genovese or even Vinny Gigante and say, look, we're going to push Philadelphia out. You support it. And we'll cut up South Philadelphia too. You guys can have the port in Philly or the naval yards, whatever the fuck you want. And in return for that, we want a part of your cut in Staten Island or the Bronx. And New York would have obliged and given it to them. So I don't understand, because universally, when you think about this, ladies and gentlemen, if you truly want more power and you're sort of being encircled in your own area, naturally, okay, let's expand outside of the area. And the only way you're going to get that done is by pushing Philadelphia out. Could they have pushed Philly out? Under John Riggi, absolutely. I think they could have. The problem is Nicky Scarfo. Because that would have been the time period. I would have waited till like fucking Italy tried to take over and they had the Stampa shit. Then I would have moved in and just killed everybody and taken over. That would have been the time to do it. But, you know, it is what it is. And a lot of people don't talk about New Jersey, I think, because A, they don't know how Jersey operates. And they don't understand the dynamics and the political atmosphere that New Jersey faces, being where they're located. And that's something that I think a lot of mob content creators don't ever take into consideration when they're talking about it. Just because you're in a small area, you don't have as many rackets to run, doesn't mean you're not that powerful. It just means that whatever you do have, you've consolidated and nobody can touch. And so I think history will look back on New Jersey is the mob family that never reached their full potential. For a multitude of different reasons. It's not because they didn't have the right leadership, but once again, the sort of cancerous things that we talk about on this show of ego, greed, and everybody wanting to fucking run shit. And the truth that people saw that there was more that they could get their hands on was sort of the attempted half-assed overthrow of John Riggi, which never worked. Because internal shit only starts when guys are unhappy and think they should be somewhere else and they're not. And that's not a direct shot at John Riggi or how he ran things. It's not. It's more of a symptom of the people that John Riggi surrounded himself with at a hierarchical level, other than you know, not obviously not the Takeda brothers and Stano and some of these other people. Stagno or whatever the case may be. It has more to do with the infiltration of informants, guys he thought he could trust. And that's why that family, you know, I don't want to use a word like demise, but that's why that family suffered, because of shit like that. because you can be a great boss like John Riggi was. Great boss, smart guy, highly intelligent, genius level shit. But at the same time, if you're pinning down and focusing on your captains, or somebody did this, or somebody rubbed you sideways or took too much money, you're so hyper-focused on killing that fucker to prove a point, that also has, on one hand, I always have said, murder is the true equalizer. That is the one thing, if you take off the table, you lose control, right? Problem is, murdering a guy over some small insubordination to prove a point also creates a schism effect and leads to informants, i.e. Nicky Scarfo's entire reign. You know what I mean? So that was John Riggi. Dean, I hope you'd enjoy it. Hope you all got something out of it. Join us tonight at 7:05 live Mob Talk Radio on YouTube, and we'll see everybody there. Again, if you guys know Dean, wish him a very happy birthday on Friday. Other than that, we will see everybody right here, same time, same bat channel next week for an all-new show, hopefully a bigger Q&A, and we will be live tonight. So see everybody tonight, 7:05.